Friends, please pray with me. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight. You are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. These are lovely sayings, are they not? I mean, they're lovely. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And blessed are you who mourn, for you will be comforted. I mean, they kind of, for me, call to mind inspirational posters, perhaps in a doctor's office, or those little precious moments figures. Do you guys remember those? They were sort of big in the Christian bookstores in the 80s, and my mom really loved them. We had quite a few in our house. I'm pretty sure she still has them. There were those little angelic, very white faces depicting various things like, blessed are the peacemakers. As I grew up, I really began to appreciate a lot of satirical humor and satirical commentary, and subscribed for a while in my 20s to a magazine called The Wittenberg Door. And the Wittenberg Door had an ad one month that was about biblical scenes that will never be precious moments. It depicted things such as the beheading of John the Baptist, and Jesus turning over the tables in the temple. Indeed, biblical scenes that will never be quaint. And perhaps that's actually a little more true to the spirit of some of these really lovely things that we're encountering today. And so now we get to delve a little bit more into the Word and the words. So these sayings about the blessed ones that we've called the beatitudes are in two places in our scriptures. One is in Matthew, and that's where we are today. The other is in Luke. Matthew was written a little earlier, Luke a little bit later, and Matthew's beatitudes have a sort of interior nature about them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, whereas Luke say, like, blessed are the poor. It's very much more cut and dry with Luke. Both are important, and both are true. I think that one of the reasons for Matthew's more interior focus is because I think the author of Matthew was writing to a group of folks who needed to figure out a way to have something inside of them that could not be taken away. I think that there was this goal to have a kingdom, a realm, being able to be built inside oneself, essentially, that oppression and unjust governments and things like war couldn't actually get to or touch. It's a little bit like you're not defined by the trauma, essentially. Trauma is a part of us. It marks us, it changes us, but it doesn't have to become the whole of who we are. Now, I have to say that, though we still have to remember Luke's version as well, blessed are the poor, Matthew's version isn't an excuse to not do the actual work of helping folks who are poor. And Luke probably edited his version of this gospel to make that point even more true. So this is the opening scene, this passage, of what we have come to call the Sermon on the Mount. A few weeks ago, I was talking some about Matthew and sort of setting it up for you guys to know, which you may already know, that there are a lot of echoes of Moses with the Jesus that we see in Matthew. And this is another one, and it's a really important one. That's why this is set up on a mountain. So folks who are reading this or hearing this would go, oh yeah, Moses on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments. And they would know, oh, this is like the instructions, the sequel, right? So that's what they would know. But we should also remember that Jesus was not doing this. He was not giving these instructions up on the mountain to do away with Moses' law. He was doing so to fulfill Moses' law. And he was explaining more about how to walk in the way and what that means in real life terms. We're beginning a series for the next few weeks from the pulpit about walking in the Jesus way. Another word for this path or this way is discipleship. Discipleship is one of those words that I really, really want the progressive church to reclaim from the more evangelical churches. It's an important word. It's a lovely, difficult, life-giving, transforming process. Discipleship has its cost, for sure, but it is also, more than anything, a path of joy and peace. It's about becoming more and more who we are actually created to be, and it's about having our authentic, God-natured selves emerge in the process of living. The process has its pains, yes, but life is already painful. I mean, we can't really do much about it. It just is, and so we have options as to what we do with that, which we cannot escape. And being another bonus of being on the path of discipleship is we have, as Christians, we have a promise. And that promise, as Romans tells us, is that God works all things together for our good. And the path of discipleship is a way of living into that more and more and more. You can ask any of our confirmands around. They've heard me talk about discipleship lately. And I've been asking, why do we do this? Why does it matter if we choose to become a disciple in a real transforming way? Why? And we had some interesting answers throughout the room, ranging from because it's the right thing to do, to secure a spot for ourselves in heaven, to blank stares. So I've certainly been thinking about this question myself. Why does it matter? I mean, we're Christians. I mean, isn't that enough? And here's what I know. We actually don't have to be on this path. We have a choice about being on this path. We don't have to do anything. We can check off the box identifying ourselves as Christian, right next to Caucasian, female, 30, okay, 40-something. And as far as God is concerned, walking in the way of discipleship actually doesn't make us any more beloved than we already are. Because nothing we do or don't do actually takes away from our own belovedness bank account. It's a done deal, signed, sealed, delivered, thankfully. What a gift. But stopping there with a yes, thank you, count me in, God, is stopping at the beginning. It's like living a life with colors that are lovely but muted. Not all they could be, not as bright as they could be. So becoming a disciple, should you choose it, is to engage in the process of a relationship with your Creator that rubs away the rough edges and moves us beyond ego and beyond persona. It's not in any way about being perfect, but it's about being in process and doing so intentionally. The path of discipleship leads to living more and more from our deepest essence in this world and in this life, amidst career changes and diaper changes, amidst heartbreak and joy, fear and hope. So no, we don't have to be on this path, but for me it comes down to two main reasons why I choose to be. And those reasons are about my life here on this earth in this time. Peace and purpose. Peace and purpose. So how in the world does being poor in spirit then lead to peace and purpose? Yes, it's true, the riddle me that Batman nature of these sayings seems a bit foolish, if not naive. Or a little counterintuitive. We don't think of this as a means to power. But this is really a personal kind of power. The poor in spirit have a personal kind of power that is grounded in the power of the Spirit and supported in community. The kind of power that loses its power, actually, if it's ever used to power over another person. Because real power has nothing to prove. It just is. One thing I think that the poor in spirit are are folks whose sense of meaning and purpose is found on the path that they are taking, as opposed to finding their worth in the ways dominant culture tends to find its worth. The things that are typically seen as proof of one's value. Stuff, things you have, where you are on the economic spectrum, your job, your amount of education, your looks, all of these kinds of things. The poor in spirit can be absolutely anywhere on the economic spectrum because they know that self-worth is not dependent on net worth. Now, of course, those who are poor do suffer in ways that those who are not simply don't, and I have to say that. I mean, just think for 1 second here about our IHN guests this week. Every week, these families pack up their stuff and move to a new place. Every week, they have to meet new people, learn a new routine, and interact with them. And honestly, it makes me exhausted just to think about having to uproot my life that much every week. So hear me that this, again, is not an excuse to stop working for the end of poverty. And at the same time, we are reminded, and we know this, that folks who have more wealth are not immune to suffering. And sometimes folks who have more wealth suffer because of their attachment to their wealth. So here in Matthew, we have a gift. We have an insight into this, regardless of where we are on the economic spectrum, is that self-worth is really more like God-worth, because nothing and no one can take away the inherent worth that is immeasurable in God's realm. Because no matter what, you're a beloved daughter, and no matter what, you're a beloved son. The path of discipleship is about living so fully into that regardless of how much you do or don't have, it doesn't actually add to or take away from your personal sense of worth. So how in the world then is mourning a path of joy? A path of peace and purpose? I mean, come on. But let's remember that joy and happiness are actually two different things. Happiness is a feeling. It's a state of happiness is a feeling. Joy is a state of being. Joy is an experience. It's something that fills us, and it can even be there in the midst of great sadness. I would guess most of you know the difference, that you have felt it. We can feel it. I worked as a family counselor at a children's hospice in North Carolina in my former career. It was my first job right out of my first graduate program. And, people sort of glaze over when I say I worked at a children's hospice. All sorts of things sort of go on, it seems. But I have to say, as ironic as it may sound, it was some of the most joyous work I've ever done. Because the thing about death and dying is that none of us are spared. The reality is, at some point, we will all lose that we just really don't know how to live without, or think that we can't live without. It's one of those swift equalizers. I led a teen group on Monday afternoons called Lost and Found. This was a group of adolescents getting together, some of whom were our patients, some of whom were sick, but some whose sibling was sick or who had a parent who was sick, and we would get together and over foosball and soda, hang out and be there. And in their own beautifully awkward adolescent way, these kids supported each other. And these were kids that would have never known each other had this not been the case, had they not been brought together by mourning, by loss, by illness. All different spectrums, all different demographic identifiers for these kids, but they got together and shared pop songs or offbeat indie music that helped them. They shared poems and symbols from their pockets like they were talisman of their courage. They knew a thing or two about joy in the midst of mourning, and they were my teachers, these kids. Now, we mourn and we grieve. Really, any change in life, that means life as we knew it will never be what it was. And that's not just death. I mean, certainly that's relationship changes, job transitions, or the realization that the thing that we had really hoped for just isn't going to happen. So mourning involves a surrender to that which we cannot change, and it's some of the hardest work we will ever do in this life. And I don't have to tell you guys that. I know you know. I know a lot of you know. We have to have our rage, we have to have our anger about our losses, and we have to go into the broken chasm that was once our heart. We have to integrate it with all of our chapters of our journey, and we have to let it be used for something. Remember, in Romans, we are promised all things are used together for good. And this is the path of discipleship, purpose. God does not cause this stuff to happen, but God does use it for good if we allow it. And the question that eventually emerges when we really sit with our broken hearts is this: broken open for what? For what? What is your heart and your life now open to that it would not have been open to before? So why do this? Why be a disciple? Because it's a way of allowing God to resurrect us continually into new life out of death. And this is where mercy is rooted, like shoots of new life shooting up through the cracks of your heart. And that's when you know what it means to be merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy begets mercy. When we let God transform our pain, we know what it feels like and what it is like to have pain and survive it. And it creates mercifulness inside of us that allows us to really be with people. We're not afraid of it anymore. We're not afraid of the dark. We're not afraid of the pain. We can be with people right there in that place without having to offer platitudes, without having to act like it's something other than what it is. So blessed are the merciful. The pure in spirit know a thing or two about how to do this. I think that the pure in spirit are those who their inner reality and their outer reality, like their inner self and their outer self, are closer and closer and closer together. I believe that the pure in spirit are those who have a real deep sense of congruency with who they are and have figured out what it means to really live that in the world. There's less need for a persona because following Jesus means allowing our egos, the face we show the world, to be melted away by God's love and bring forth our essence. I have to confess I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan. Give a little shout out for Shadowlands that's going to be performed here soon. Yes. But one of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis is actually from Mere Christianity. And he's writing about this process of becoming more oneself as the path of discipleship. And he says, there are no real personalities apart from God. Until you have given up yourself to God, you will not have a real self. Sameness is to be found among the most natural of people, not among those who surrender to Christ. How monotonously alike all the great tyrants and conquerors have been, and how gloriously different all the saints. And it's communities like this, and I still think the church is our best example of real community. So it's communities like this that support this process by loving each other into being, by simply loving each other into being. I cannot delve as deeply as I want to into all of our scripture today because there is just so much here, so much more to do with it, so many more conversations. I want to say just one more thing, though, about hungering and thirsting for righteousness, is that this is not about one's own piety. This is not about wanting to be more righteous yourself, if that makes sense. It's about that gnawing feeling that something isn't right, that thing that wakes you up in the night, the thing that gets under your skin that you just can't not do something about. So it's really all the justice and equality movements that have happened throughout history, hungering and thirsting for righteousness. My beloved state of North Carolina right now is hungering and thirsting for righteousness. So much so, in fact, I am proud to say that between 80 and 100,000 folks descended on Raleigh, North Carolina yesterday as part of the Moral Monday rally, including Jeffrey Black, the current president of our denomination, and a good number of folks, including my home minister, Julie Peoples, to hold a worship service there very early in the morning. 100,000 people came, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, to try to undo a lot of the legislation that has been passed lately that is quite oppressive. Whew. The Beatitudes, there's so much here, and I love them. And again, we don't have to do this. We don't. It's really okay. But we can. And it's not unlike a lot of other spiritual paths. If you've ever spent much time with the 12 steps or have friends for whom that's really important, they're really quite similar. If you've ever spent much time in a monastery and trying to learn a little bit about Zen meditation and no mind, it's really very similar. So there's commonality here among great thought about what it means to be on a spiritual path. And I guess for me, precious moments are when connection really happens. Precious moments are moments that are real with all of their messiness and all of their beauty. There are many entry points to this path, my friends. It's sort of like those signs at the gym. Just show up. Just show up. Just get on, and we can do this together.